Imagine you are just chilling, scrolling through funny videos, and then boom, you're suddenly in a whole different world. That's exactly what happened to our main character. One moment he's ranting online about the impracticality of time travel. The next he's waking up as Tu Yi, the good-for-nothing new emperor of the Daqian Dynasty. But there's a twist. Tu Yi isn't just an emperor, he's got a system in his wristband, promising a return home if he can tank the dynasty. Everyone around him wants to use him, and all of his ministers are traitors. I mean, how hard can it be? Right. Our story starts in the Daqian Dynasty imperial palace of a different world. The former emperor Tu Qianjun had died, and his fourth son Tu Yi was now the heir to the throne. However, he was not the prince that Tu Qianjun had appointed in his lifetime. The only reason Tu Yi was able to ascend to the throne was due to the support of some treacherous ministers. He was a complete loser and had no talent. He sounds kinda like me. Unfortunately, our main character found himself in Tu Yi's body. Not long ago, he was living a fairly normal life in the modern world. He used to watch videos of cat girls dancing and giving advice on things. While scrolling through this informative content, he came across a post that asked an interesting question about traveling back in time. This made him furious, and just like a true Redditor, he started fuming at his keyboard and writing unreasonably large paragraphs. He reasoned that there were no modern facilities in ancient times, so there was no point in going back. Therefore, in his eyes, the best place to be was the modern era. However, fate had other plans for him. Before he knew it, he was thrown into the Daqian Dynasty. As Tu Yi tried to make sense of the things going around him, he heard a strange voice coming out of his wristband. It was actually the system talking to him. The system introduced itself as an assistant named Ben Xian. Tu Yi got mad at the system and asked if it was responsible for sending him to this place. Ben Xian told him that the system was linked to his wishes, so as long as he succeeded in destroying the Qian dynasty, he could go back home. It was Tu Yi's first time hearing of such a system. As he stared at the system in disbelief, his concubine looked at him and wondered what had caused that reaction. He used to smile every time when he looked at her, but that day, it was different. Tu Yi suddenly turned towards her and was even more confused. He didn't know who she was. However, thanks to the system, he could see her data and stats. Her name was Zhao Shu, and she was the adopted daughter of Xiao Zhuo. He had given his daughter to Tu Yi as a concubine to make it easier to control and monitor him. Shu could see a ray of light in Tu Yi's eyes as he stared at her. Tu Yi continued to look at her with curiosity. He was reading her stats and could see that she had high points in charm. Shu thought to herself that Tu Yi must have seen through her disguise. Suddenly, Tu Yi heard the voice of a man who asked him what he was thinking. Tu Yi looked down the hall and saw another man sitting there. These two were the traitor ministers who were helping him claim the throne. Tu Yi could also see their stats and data. One of them was named Li Tianyuan. He was the right prime minister of the Qian dynasty and Xiao Zhuo's stepbrother. He thought of Tu Yi as a controllable puppet and helped to establish him as the Qian emperor. The fat guy was Xiao Zhuo. He was the left prime minister of the Qian dynasty. He also thought of Li as a puppet and schemed to make him the emperor for his own gains. As Tu Yi looked at the stats of both ministers, he realized that Li Tianyuan had high points in power and scheming. Shu saw him looking this serious, and it made her a bit scared and excited at the same time. Tu Yi was still analyzing the two ministers. He noticed that Zhuo's numbers were slightly better, since he had high support and multi-talents. Zhuo asked Li if Tu Yi was worried about his throne being unstable. While drinking from the glass, Tu Yi told them he wished that he couldn't sit so firmly on the throne of a country that was going to perish soon. Shu noticed that Tu Yi was still able to respond with such emotion and anger, even after the provocations of his adoptive father. Zhao walked past the coffin of the previous emperor and told them that Tu Su was the emperor appointed by Tu Qianjun. However, he wasn't in the capital at the time as he was leading his troops abroad. The ministers had disobeyed the orders of the emperor by helping Tu Yi ascend the throne. Zhuo joked that the previous emperor wouldn't crawl out of his coffin to kill them for treason, but he couldn't say the same about Tu Su. He told Tu Yi that the news of the emperor's death had not spread yet, so they needed to take action quickly. He pulled out the Jade Seal and suggested killing Tu Su. Tu Yi thought to himself that if he issued an imperial decree to kill Tu Su, he might be able to secure the throne, but he couldn't achieve his goal of destroying the country. He would be a puppet at the mercy of the two ministers. This was all too much for Tu Yi to handle. He could deal with the political drama, but he also had a girl spying on him. So he needed to play his cards carefully. He wondered what his next move was going to be. Suddenly, his eyes fell on the jade seal, and he snatched it from Zhuo's hands. Zhuo was completely shocked upon seeing this. He frantically asked Tu Yi what he was planning to do with the jade seal. Tu Yi thought to himself that if he died, the country would surely be destroyed, so it was the perfect plan for him. Zhuo had no idea what Tu Yi was thinking. He was more worried about the jade seal in Tu Yi's hand. Zhuo shouted, asking Tu Yi what he was trying to do. Tu Yi, seeing Zhuo's attempt to retrieve the jade seal, raised it even higher and proudly taunted him. Shu wasn't worried about her father at all. Instead, she found Tu Yi extremely handsome, and thought to herself how His Highness dared to confront his foster father like this. She carefully observed Tu Yi's every move. When he asked everyone who approved and disapproved of his move, she couldn't help but be impressed by his bold move, realizing that all of Tu Yi's previous useless behaviors were just an act. Seeing Tu Yi confronting her foster father so easily, and even seemingly winning, she suddenly realized that Tu Yi had been acting all along. Now that the jade seal was in his hands, he had finally shown his true colors. On the other hand, her foster father couldn't take it anymore. Zhuo, feeling played around by Tu Yi like a fool, was so angry that he stopped and directly scolded Tu Yi, threatening him with his power to ascend to the throne and kill him. Tu Yi got even more excited and encouraged him to hurry up and kill him. He even brought up the stats and told him not to disappoint him. Zhuo couldn't bear to be humiliated like this. He rushed up, roaring that he would strangle Tu Yi to death. Shu rushed forward to pull her foster father back, urging him to calm down. However, before Zhuo could reach Tu Yi, Li stepped in and told them to stop making noise. He reminded them that they all had the same goal. Zhuo frowned and looked at the white man walking towards him. Tu Yi noticed that Li was a bit too calm. He suddenly had a thought and smiled secretly, thinking he had to add more fuel to the fire. Li saw that everyone was silent, so he decided to continue speaking. However, unexpectedly, as he turned to Tu Yi, he saw the jade seal being thrown towards him. Li's eyes darkened as he helplessly watched the national treasure of a country fall to the ground, accompanied by Tu Yi's extremely fake hoops. Tu Yi, seeing their stiffness, shrugged and calmly apologized, telling them that the jade seal slipped from his hands. The jade seal was the token for the emperor to command his subjects and rule the world. The one who held the seal could command everything, and breaking it was a crime punishable by death. Tu Yi was excited, as he thought to himself that he had successfully managed to make both of them serious. This guy wants to speedrun death. Zhuo, as expected, was so angry that he turned red, looking at Tu Yi with terrifying eyes, as if he wanted to kill him on the spot. Just as he was about to kill Tu Yi, Li stopped him, addressing Tu Yi as Your Majesty, and reminding him that the whole world was his, making the broken jade seal insignificant. He suggested that Tu Yi rest early and discuss other things tomorrow. These words left Tu Yi unable to react, as Li led Zhuo out of the hall, leaving him standing on the throne, and shouting about how the emperor and the common people were equal under the law. He just wanted them to kill him, so that the country would collapse. Zhuo and Li left the palace and returned to their residences. Zhuo couldn't help but complain about Tu Yi. He told Li that they needed to find a way to get rid of Tu Yi. Li turned around, warning Zhuo about the consequences of getting rid of Tu Yi. Zhuo called him spineless for even addressing Tu Yi as Your Majesty. Li reminded Zhuo that with the crown prince leading the army outside, the first person to blame would be Zhuo if the emperor died mysteriously in the capital. Zhuo gradually understood, but still had doubts. He found it hard to believe that Tu Yi could calculate this much. Li repeated the last line Tu Yi spoke as they were leaving and told him that it was said by the prime minister of the kingdom and a respected figure 100 years ago. Recalling the past, Zhuo thought of Tu Yi's face, and anger rose in his heart again. He declared that he would never bow down to Tu Yi, intending to kill him and put all the blame on him. Li didn't believe Tu Yi was a brainless person. He supported Tu Yi before because he was the easiest to control among the descendants of the previous emperor. However, it seemed that now Li had some other wicked plan in mind. With a scary smile, he thought to himself that the previous emperor's descendants were interesting. Meanwhile, Tu Yi was sleeping until noon. His eyes suddenly opened, and he started complaining about how boring that era was. In his boredom, he realized that someone had entered the room. It was Shu, who slowly walked into the bedroom, her face flushed red. She meekly expressed her desire to sleep with Tu Yi. Tu Yi's confusion turned to fascination as he took back everything he said about the ancient world. He finally found his true purpose in life. After spending the night with Shu, Tu Yi no longer felt bored and thought of completing his mission. While getting up, he noticed a detail in Shu's hairpin and realized that it could become the key to completing his mission of destroying the country and returning to the modern world. He wanted her to kill him using the hairpin, so he could go back home. Pouring a cup of wine, he accused Shu of being a spy sent by Zhuo. Shu, shocked, tried to deny it, but Tu Yi wasn't fooled. He told her that it was all a game for him. After that, he knowingly pretended to fall asleep on the chair and told her that it was her chance to attack. Shu, in tears, couldn't wait any longer. She took the hairpin from her head, intending to stab Tu Yi. But as she approached, Tu Yi received a notification from the system that it had finished doing an upgrade. Tu Yi was a bit confused, but he didn't really care about the upgrade since he was going home soon. The system told him that the upgrade had added a national PowerPoint system that calculated the country's total points based on different factors. His mission wouldn't be completed unless the points reached 0 or below. His initial points were at 1,000. This meant that even if he managed to get himself killed, he wouldn't go home since the points were not at 0. This made Tu Yi almost lose his mind. He quickly turned and grabbed the hairpin from Shu's hands, catching her off guard. He laughed, mocking her for being too impatient, and told her that she was not a qualified spy. The scene changed to a dream, where Shu met with her father. He asked her if she had done her job, but she couldn't answer back because she had failed. Zhuo's terrifying face and reaching hand made her cry out in fear. Suddenly, she woke up in a warm room, with Tu Yi asking if she had a nightmare. Embarrassed, she recalled Tu Yi's words about the game and his intention to make it more interesting. Tu Yi took out paper and a pen and started writing something. He told her that he was writing an imperial decree. Shu saw him writing this fiercely and got a bit scared. She had never seen him making an expression like that and thought that he must be taking action against her father. However, in reality, Tu Yi just couldn't write with a brush. He turned towards Shu and requested her to write the decree. Shu, nervous, asked what he wanted to write. Tu Yi, with a deep voice, instructed her to write that all descendants of the Tu Yi family, including Tu Su, would have their surnames removed and be demoted to commoners. Shu, in disbelief, couldn't understand why Tu Yi would do such a thing. With a creepy smile, Tu Yi thought to himself that demoting the Tu Yi family would weaken their influence and create an image of him as a cruel ruler. It had been perfect. Being able to think this way, he truly had an outstanding talent. Tu Yi only realized after a while that someone had been asking him something. He turned to look at Shu and asked what she had asked him. Shu, having seen Tu Yi's terrifying demeanor from beginning to end, immediately lowered her head in fear when he turned to her. She apologized, saying she had spoken too much, and begged for his forgiveness. Tu Yi told her that it was to increase the difficulty of the game. He reached out and touched Shu's cheek, looking at her affectionately. He explained that with this imperial decree, he would not only become a lonely person who lost his family's support, but also be labeled a cold-blooded tyrant. Tu Yi's voice remained calm as he told her to inform Zhuo of this good news. He told her to consider it as a gift from him. Shu was puzzled by his words, as she had never received a gift in her life. Tu Yi enjoyed watching her changing expressions and told her not to let him down. Though she let go of her fear, her heart was still in turmoil. She knew he was deceiving her, yet she felt happy. A while later, Shu arrived at Zhuo's residence to find her adoptive father. She knocked on the door for a while before someone opened it. Zhuo frowned when he saw her, asking why she came so late. Shu entered and reported that she had come with important information. She honestly recounted everything that had happened, explaining that Tu Yi had issued an imperial decree to demote all the members of the Tu Yi royal family to commoners. Zhuo was shocked beyond belief. Even Li was shocked as he couldn't believe Tu Yi's actions. Zhuo looked anxiously at Li for a solution, mentioning that they had just made plans to establish a new emperor from among the Tu Yi descendants, and that Tu Yi was obviously targeting them. Li paused before speaking, asking how she knew that the information was reliable. Shu stammered that Tu Yi wanted her to write the imperial decree herself. Zhu was even more surprised by this and, in a fit of rage, slapped her mercilessly, calling her a fool. Shu fell to the ground, holding her cheek in pain, but still answered politely that she had not revealed their secret. Despite her words, Zhuo didn't believe her and shouted that if she had told Tu Yi, why would he let her write the imperial decree? As he was about to hear again, Li stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder, urging him to calm down. He reasoned that if Shu had leaked the information, they wouldn't have known about the decree. He suggested that this was Tu Yi's plan to sow discord between them, and prevent them from establishing a new prince. Zhuo, gritting his teeth in anger, listened to Li and stepped forward to help Shu up with a gentler expression. He apologized to his daughter and told her that he had wrongly accused her. Shu, in pain, didn't dare talk back to her adoptive father and told her that she wouldn't dare blame him for anything. After dealing with Shu, Zhuo turned to Li and asked for his opinion on the next step. He told him that his plan to install a new king was no longer relevant. However, he had a better plan in mind. Zhuo told him that he would rally the courtiers and humiliate Tu Yi during his first court session. In Li's mind, Zhuo was not someone who would do great things. Li no longer objected to Zhuo's plan, but secretly had his own ideas. Away from all this, Tu Yi was sitting in his room rereading his edict. He had prepared it, just waiting for a good opportunity to announce it, but it would probably still be a long time before his points accumulated to 0. He put his chin in his hand and thought carefully. He believed there were many ways to deduct his national power points. Reflecting on his limited knowledge, Tu Yi came up with an idea in history. Except for trusting traitors and paying no attention to state affairs, forcefully coercing civilian women into the harem was common practice to ensure the downfall of a country. His idea excited him, so he decided to act on it. He thought to himself that the emperor's bones hadn't even gone cold yet, and he was going to issue an order to force the female relatives of all the great mandarins in the court to enter the royal palace. He thought that it would definitely break their hearts. He believed this would not only reduce a large number of points, but also provide some personal benefits. While thinking about it, Tu Yi made a terrifying face, making the guard next to him fear that he would bite him. He loudly ordered Zhuo and Li to go to the study room. After a while, Zhuo and Li arrived at the palace and went together to the emperor's study room. As soon as Tu Yi saw them, he smiled widely and enthusiastically welcomed them. He told them to sit down and feel at home. Li bowed to thank His Majesty for the offer. After Zhuo sat in his seat, he showed an unpleasant expression and asked Tu Yi about attending the courts now that he had become the emperor. In his heart, Zhuo was chuckling, thinking that he would negotiate with the great minister of the party and unite to prevent Tu Yi from stepping down. After hearing Zhuo's words, Tu Yi thought to himself that attending the court would surely raise his country's points. He realized he needed to create the image of a lazy king, with no work to reduce his score. He lazily stretched his arms and told Zhuo that it was too troublesome. Tu Yi said that he had just ascended the throne and didn't have any experience yet. He instead ordered them to take care of the courts. Tu Yi looked at the two of them with a smile. This answer was exactly what Li had expected. He thought that the emperor had not only guessed that Zhuo wanted to suppress him at court, but also found a way for them to attend to the courts without him. Zhuo's crude plans were completely disregarded. After Tu Yi refused to go to court, he thought it was time to launch his plan to reduce points by recruiting his harem. So he spoke up and told them that the reason he called them to the palace was to discuss the expansion of his harem. He explained that it was embarrassing that only Shu was in the harem, so he wanted to gather beautiful women and expand it. My man is living the dream life. Hearing this, Zhuo fell back, thinking to himself that the first emperor had just been buried, and now Tu Yi was thinking from his lower body. Never before had he seen someone so bold and shameless. Li was also quite surprised. He didn't think Tu Yi had called them for an audience to discuss something unrelated to state affairs. Recruiting a harem seemed like a strange trick. Tu Yi urged them to talk about it quickly, hoping to bring the national strength points to 0. After hearing this, the two old men were silent, still a bit confused by Tu Yi's unexpected intention. After a while, Zhuo wiped the sweat from his face and told him that he supported his idea of gathering beautiful women from all over the world, but they were short on time. Tu Yi interrupted and told him that he understood his concern and knew that they couldn't gather women from all over the world, so instead they should start searching in the capital. Hearing that, Zhuo was surprised, thinking that Tu Yi could not wait any longer. Li did not trust Tu Yi easily and reminded himself not to let the emperor deceive him with the story of wanting to find a beautiful woman. Tu Yi told them that he had found a way to save time. They could start by choosing among the female relatives from the families of the great mandarins in the court. This statement made Li's eyes widen in surprise. After a while of discussing adding more women to the harem, Tu Yi let the two men go home. On the way back, Zhuo told Li that Tu Yi didn't pay attention to the court, but also ordered to recruit the harem. It was clearly the rhythm of a true tyrant, but the kid found his own way to die from the position of emperor, saving them a lot of effort. Li didn't respond to a single word from Zhuo, but after hearing the old man's constant chatter, he had to stop walking. Li shouted at Zhuo and told him that if he didn't stop underestimating Tu Yi, they would end up getting their entire families executed. Zhuo didn't understand what Li meant. Just looking at his stupid expression, it was clear. Realizing he had spoken loudly, Li quickly looked around to see if anyone could hear him. Knowing he was a bit loud, he softly apologized to Zhuo and told him that Tu Yi's actions were all part of a big plan. Zhuo told him that he couldn't see the strategy. They replied seriously, reminding him that he just made a plan to embarrass Tu Yi at court, but he easily solved it, proving that he knew their intentions inside out. Zhuo, still confused, said that they had made that plan before they even left for the palace. He thought that someone might have leaked the info. Li replied saying that Tu Yi might have figured it out in advance, and that was the scary part. Not only that, he also recruited a harem. It looked like insatiable sexual promiscuity, but it was aimed at them. It was a continuous plan, forming one whole strategy. The two old men walked out of the palace with heavy hearts. After hearing Li's analysis, Zhu started to feel something was wrong, but still didn't understand everything. So he asked again what Li meant by a continuous plan. Li replied firmly that Tu Yi didn't need to go to court because he was confident that he could control the government without being there. Li's face suddenly changed as he told him that by recruiting the female relatives of the mandarins' families into the harem, through intermarriage, Tu Yi could directly entice the high officials, undermining their power in the court. It's like Death Note, but they're making everything up. Li's analysis made sense. Zhuge was also scared after hearing it. He asked him what they could do against Tu Yi and began to form a plan in his mind. He smiled mysteriously and asked him what else they could do. Now that he was the majesty, he needed to expand his bloodline and build his harem. He turned back to look at Zhuo, his eyes showing he had thought of a plan against Tu Yi. He told him that they were his subjects and they needed to fulfill his wishes. A few days later at the royal palace, Li returned to tell him that they had turned all of his descendants into commoners. Only the eldest prince, Tu Su, had received the decree as he was stationed outside. Tu Yi wagged his hand and said that those things weren't important. He turned back to Li and asked him how the selection of harem was going. Someone bonked this guy real quick. Li bowed and told him that he hadn't failed his request, but due to limited time, he couldn't choose the best woman. He clapped his hands and signaled all the girls to come out. Tu Yi seemed very satisfied with Li's preparations. His face turned red with excitement. In front of him was a group of beautiful women, each one more stunning than the last. Tu Yi's eyes lit up at the sight, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was in paradise. The crowd quickly lined up neatly in front of Tu Yi, then bowed one by one and paid their respects. Tu Yi quickly collected himself, scratched his head shyly, and told them to rise. He walked up to Li and whispered, asking him if there were any girls who would like to indulge. Li couldn't really understand what he meant and was confused. Tu Yi pouted, thinking that Li was just pretending to be serious. Even though he hadn't heard of indulgence before, he still couldn't figure out what was going on. He wanted to find someone who knew a lot of unique poses, but Li suspected Tu Yi was up to something. And this was why he asked about the concubines brought in this time. They were mostly noble women with little influence, and they seemed reasonable enough. But there were two women, Fan Taozhu and Zhu Gasha, who were a bit different. Over 10 years ago, the wealthy Pham and Zhuge families had angered the emperor and had their entire families beheaded. Li, who was in charge of the execution, secretly saved these two children. For 10 years, he hid their identities and raised them himself. Surprisingly, they inherited the talents of their families and became important players for him. Before bringing them to the palace, Li met with them in a private room. He reminded them of their families and asked them if they were willing to take revenge. The previous emperor had died, but they still had an opportunity to take revenge by killing him and causing the downfall of the country. Li also warned them that it was dangerous, since the emperor was really cunning and cruel. Tao Zhu, full of rage, immediately agreed, saying she'd risk anything for revenge. Next to her, Zhuge also agreed loudly. She had long been prepared to sacrifice herself. Their strong desire for revenge fits perfectly with Li's plans. He took advantage of this and placed them near Tu Yi as concubines to keep an eye on him. After observing them for a while, Tu Yi's sharp eyes noticed the two beautiful sisters, Taozhu and Zhuge. Li was worried, wondering if his plan had been exposed. In fact, Tu Yi was checking their profiles through the system. Zhuge was the daughter of a great scholar from the Qianjun era and the only survivor of her family, who had been killed by Emperor Qianjun. Taozhu was the niece of a wealthy merchant house, and also the sole survivor of her family's execution. Both had been raised by Li and were now set to seek revenge and destroy the country. Tu Yi saw their stats. Zhuge had high skills in rebellion and Machiavellianism. On the other hand, Tao Zhu had high scores in martial prowess, meaning that she was good at fighting. Tu Yi was pleased. They were exactly the kind of troublemakers that fit his country's fate. He acted like he didn't know anything and went over to check out the two girls. He asked their names. Tao Zhu spoke up first, saying her name was Ah Zhu, and then Zhuge introduced herself as Ah Sha. Tu Yi looked at Ah Sha and told her that she looked a bit nervous. Li was worried as he saw that Ah Sha was overwhelmed by Tu Yi's intense stare. When Ah Sha didn't respond, Tu Yi gently lifted her chin and told her not to be scared. He smiled, trying to look charming, but unexpectedly, Ah Sha's face turned red and she started crying. It was clear she wasn't used to close contact with men. The system notified that Ah Sha's hidden traits weren't recorded. Under the stress of Tu Yi's touch, she fainted. Tao Zhu saw this and felt very stressed. Tu Yi was surprised, never expecting someone to faint just from a light touch. He was also scared, since he didn't want Li to replace the two spies. Tu Yi wanted to show favor to Li, but he didn't expect Ah Sha to react so poorly, with Ah Sha fainted on the ground. Li worried that her identity might be exposed, so he would definitely try to take her back. Seeing Ah Sha faint, Li quickly knelt down and admitted his mistake. He said he had chosen the wrong person, and that Ah Sha was disrespectful to the king and deserving punishment. However, Tu Yi stopped him, thinking that he still needed both women to stir up trouble. He reluctantly decided to continue the act. Tu Yi quickly picked her up and said that he liked the kind of girl who would faint with just a single touch. Behind them, Tao Zhu felt better, knowing that Tu Yi was still interested in Ah Sha. She couldn't help but think to herself that Tu Yi was a pervert. Relieved that Tu Yi still wanted to keep Ah Sha, Li wiped the sweat from his forehead and thanked Tu Yi. Tu Yi announced that Ah Sha would be with him that night. Tao Zhu glared at him in her mind, thinking she would eventually get her revenge. Tu Yi noticed her gaze and asked her if she was looking at him that way because she also wanted to spend the night with him. His tone was sinister. He then suggested they play a three-person game tonight. Tao Zhu was shocked, realizing she'd have to share a bed with her enemy and her sister. Soon, Tu Yi took both women to his room. He looked at the two women, thinking they were the most decent in tonight's beautiful chaos. My man has a sleeper build. Looking at the two women, Tu Yi couldn't help but feel a bit greedy. They were stunning. From what he learned through the display system, he knew they were sent to mess things up for him. He figured they must have some hidden talents, especially since Li had raised them in secret and handed them over to him. What Tu Yi found annoying was that the system only showed their basic stats and not their real skills. He had no idea what kind of tricks they had up their sleeve. Tu Yi walked over to the bed, but instead of doing anything, he stood there in silence. Ah Zhu saw him and wondered what he was thinking. Ah Zhu and Ah Sha exchanged glances. Before coming here, they thought they'd be subjected to all sorts of humiliation and physical pressure from the king. They expected to be treated as mere toys. But Tu Yi's indifference surprised them. He didn't seem as interested as they had feared, which made them nervous. They recalled what Li had told them earlier. He advised them not to worry about their identities, since he had done a good job trying to hide it. Tu Yi was lustful, but he wasn't easily swayed by beauty, so they needed to provide him with something extra. While Ah Sha and Ah Zhu pondered this, Tu Yi approached them and asked what they were thinking. He didn't really care about their thoughts, though. Instead, he asked them if they had any special talents. Ah Sha and Ah Zhu felt a pang of anxiety. To avoid revealing their true identities, Ah Sha answered carefully. She said she had skills in divination, star observation, witchcraft, healthcare, and medicine. When she mentioned alchemy, Tu Yi couldn't help but be impressed. Ah Sha also mentioned that she had skills in the bedroom, which made Ah Zhu roll her eyes and think that she dared talk about such a skill, when she fainted with a single touch from the king. Tu Yi turned towards Ah Zhu and asked her what her special skills were. Ah Zhu looked at Tu Yi's face and guessed he wasn't too impressed with Ah Sha's answer. Ah Zhu came from a merchant family. From a young age, she had learned to trade and read people's hearts. After her father's accident, she realized that those skills could make her a target for suspicion. The whole idea of revenge was to first protect yourself, while showing your worth. Ah Zhu played the weak and helpless woman with a lot of money. She thought this was the best act, because who would suspect a vulnerable woman with a fortune? When she said she had no special skills and only a lot of money, Tu Yi was surprised. To him, it sounded like her superpower was just being rich. She's literally Batman. Tu Yi figured if anyone could help with his plan to destroy the country, it would be these two. He then told Zhu that he was the king, so he didn't need her money. Instead, he asked her if she was willing to manage the national treasury. Zhu was shocked. She never expected that Tu Yi would want her to handle such an important role. Tu Yi thought that she came from a wealthy merchant family. Her family was profit-oriented and adept at financial fraud, so she would be the best fit to ruin the country's finances. Tu Yi also gave Asha a position as a female national teacher, overseeing the hospital and being responsible for his longevity through alchemy. Asha was stunned. She hadn't expected that on her first night, without offering anything to the prince, she'd get control of such a huge responsibility. Tu Yi, excited, also told Asha that she needed to wear a robe from now on, since he loved cosplay. Tu Yi wanted the palace to have fun with cosplay, imagining different outfits and beautiful women. His thoughts were racing, and he was thrilled about the idea. He thought about having a cosplay party in the harem. Meanwhile, in the study room, Zhuo was busy drafting a fake decree. After Tu Yi refused to kill Tu Su, Zhuo decided to handle it himself. He knew how to replicate the Jade Seal and wanted to forge a fake decree. Tu Su was an able leader, but he wasn't that sharp-minded. He would obey any command with the imperial decree, even if it meant killing himself. As long as he was able to eliminate him, Tu Yi would have no reinforcements left to fight them, and he would be at his mercy. Shumo called his general into the room and ordered him to hand over the imperial decree to Tu Su. The general immediately followed the order and left the palace with a few men and horses. However, during their journey, they encountered some strange men in masks. There was also a girl with a crow on her shoulder. The girl sat on a tree next to the marching men. Before she could make a move, she slipped and fell down. The two masked men next to her weren't surprised at all. They looked at each other, shook their heads, and said that her passive skill had kicked in again. They were used to it by now. The leader of the soldiers, who had started feeling uneasy, looked around and saw something unusual, a rope blocking their path. He quickly pulled the reins to stop the horses, but many soldiers behind him tripped over the rope, causing a chain reaction. Horses fell, and one broke its leg. Before they could get back on their feet, the army was attacked. The masked men jumped down from the trees and emerged from the bushes. The black-clad men began firing arrows. Some of the army soldiers managed to draw their swords in time, avoiding a few shots. The masked group, now on the ground, drew their own swords. One of the masked men said that Lord Shiyao had ordered them not to let anyone escape. The soldier leader shouted and asked them how they dared to block a royal decree, despite being mere thugs. He slashed through them one after the other and made his way forward. Suddenly, he saw a figure with giant bird wings descending from the sky, with a sword in hand. He was terrified. The woman in black pressed a knife to his neck, and in a few seconds, the general was silenced forever. The woman was named Shiyao, and she was the leader of the Kun Guard. The black-clad men started searching and gathered important items. One of the men handed her the imperial decree. As she read the decree, she realized that it ordered Tu Su to commit suicide, and it was issued by the tyrant king. One of her subordinates, holding the decree, asked if their actions were overstepping, since they interrupted a royal decree. Xiaoan pointed a finger at him and asked him if he had already forgotten the true intentions of the Kun Guard. Their job was to operate in the shadows and protect the Emperor Qian Jun. In order to do that, they were allowed to act ruthlessly and use bloody methods. Their allegiance was to the late emperor, and he had appointed Tu Su as the new crown prince. Now that the late emperor had passed away, it was their duty to fulfill his wishes and support Tu Su in becoming the emperor. Shi Yao clenched her fist and, in a dramatic gesture, tore up the sacred decree. The men below stared in shock, not daring to speak. Shi Yao told them that Tu Yi was their enemy now, and it was their job to eradicate him. Meanwhile, Crown Prince Tu Su was still in the north. Even if he didn't stop, it would take him 4 days to return to the capital. Within those 4 days, Tu Yi wouldn't notice anything unusual about the imperial decree. Shi Yao told herself she needed to kill him before then. Meanwhile, Tu Yi was playing cards with Zhu and Asha. He sneezed unexpectedly and wondered if any beauty was missing him. It had been 5 days since Zhuo had given away the fake edict, but the old man was totally unaware that his subordinates had already been wiped out. He was wandering around the palace, waiting for news and grumbling about the general. While he was worrying, Li walked in and asked what he was waiting for. Shuo was caught by surprise and didn't know what to say. He asked him why he was coming to meet with him so late. Li, looking cheerful, told him that he had good and bad news. Shuo was more concerned about the bad news and wanted to know if it affected him. Li smirked a little and told him that his plan to kill Tusu had failed. Zhuo's eyes widened in shock. He jumped up, grabbed Li by the collar, and shouted that he was talking nonsense. Li shook off Zhuo's grip and reminded him that they were both on the same side. The general he sent was killed outside the city 5 days ago by the leader of the Kun Guard. Zhuo stared at Li, unable to believe what he was hearing. Kun Guard was the shadow army under the late emperor's command, but he couldn't understand why they would attack the general. Li tried to calm him down and told him that they shouldn't focus on that for now. The good news was that Shi Yao was blaming Tu Yi for the imperial decree, and he was on her target list. Zhuo's mood switched from worried to pleased in an instant. He smiled and said that it was good news. However, he became tense again, questioning Li how he knew about this secret. It was impossible for one of the guards to leak the information. Li acted mysterious and told him that he had his own ways. I'm sure the crows snitched on them. Zhuo walked over to the window, looked out at the night sky, and said that it was actually good luck. It was a blessing and a curse. They could use this chance to upset the balance between Tu Yi and Tu Su. Tonight, he was holding a banquet at the Qianyuan Palace with a large crowd. So it was the perfect time for Shi Yao to attack and get rid of him. He also added that he had made arrangements to relax the guards during the night. Whether the assassination succeeded or failed, Tu Su would bear the blame. Li smiled with a hint of malice and said that a person like Tu Su wouldn't be scared if he lost the moral high ground. Zhuo was impressed by Li's plan. He said that it was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, taking out Tu Yi and ruining his reputation. He realized that Li truly was cunning. However, the scenario Li had just described was the ideal case. Li told him that the actual result depended on fate. Zhuo was happy with the plan, but got uneasy when Li mentioned fate. He frowned and asked what he meant by that. The plan seemed pretty solid. He couldn't understand what other problems would show up. Li told him that he had just come by to say hi and inform him about the plan. He didn't answer Zhuo's question, said his goodbyes, and quietly walked away. As he descended the stairs, he thought about the other half of the plan. The one thing he couldn't control was the king himself. Logically, Zhu and Asha hated Tu Yi deeply, so they would likely act tonight at the Qianyuan Palace. They tried to use the chaos to their advantage and attack the king. But even though they were smart and quick, Li wondered if they could win against the cunning mind of Tu Yi. He hoped this was just his own suspicion, and that the 2 women who set up the plan would succeed without any issues. At the same time, the harem at Qianyuan Palace was finally getting ready. Everyone in the harem was wearing new outfits, and they were all complimenting each other. The conversation was filled with flattery, but beneath the surface, the real players in the harem weren't just there to compliment each other. They saw the other women as mere decorations, thinking that dressing up a little was naive and not enough to get the king's attention. Among the harem, there was one special person, Shi Yao. She was hiding her face almost like an assassin. She had one job. As she looked around, she was disgusted to find out that the king had arranged such an event, since the costumes had no limits. What shocked her even more was that although these women didn't seem to have any martial skills, they exuded a chilling killing intent. For someone like Shi Yao who was used to battle, this murderous aura was startling. It made her realize that the king's harem was indeed intimidating. Shi Yao's appearance drew the attention of several women. Instead of praising her, they laughed at her outfit. They had never seen her in the palace, so they thought that she might be a maid who was trying to stand out. Some women were bolder, walking up to Shi Yao and sarcastically telling her that her outfit was creative, but she was nothing in front of them without power and background. Shi Yao heard every word. Normally, she would have drawn her sword and fought back, but she held her anger in. Even though Shi Yao was fuming with anger, she tried to stay calm and remind herself to focus on the mission. She knew she could make a scene. Soon, the sound of the king's entrance echoed through the room. Shi Yao quickly turned to the main door as Tu Yi walked in, flanked by his attendants. He was dressed in shorts and a loose robe, looking like a total show-off. Bro is living the dream life of every weeb. He waved happily and welcomed everyone with a flying kiss. The women were instantly charmed, screaming and declaring their love for him. Some even went as far as to offer to have children with him. In the crowd, Tu Yi noticed a pink shadow. It was Shi Yao in disguise. Tu Yi's assistant quickly updated him with Shi Yao's stats. She had high martial prowess, making her a dangerous assassin. Shi Yao had a reputation for ambushes, robberies, and assassinations, and she was loyal to the crown prince, but she wanted to help him succeed. Seeing Tu Yi's strange look at her, Shi Yao felt a bit guilty and wondered if he had found her out. She fumbled with the short knife she had brought and stared at Tu Yi. ready to strike. Tu Yi seemed surprised that Shi Yao dared to call them out in front of so many people. Shi Yao had been waiting for this chance for a long time. With so many people around, she was cautious and held the knife tightly, waiting for the right moment to approach the king. The other women in the harem were confused and annoyed. They scolded Shi Yao for talking to the king in such a way. They didn't understand the concept of cosplay and thought that Shi Yao was just acting to please Tu Yi. 5 days earlier, Tu Yi had announced a cosplay party at the harem. The women were puzzled by the idea. Tu Yi explained that cosplay was about dressing up as different characters and playing roles. The harem women were bewildered by this new concept. When Shi Yao called Tu Yi a king, they mistakenly thought it was part of the cosplay. They believed that being bold and daring was the essence of cosplay. In front of the entire harem, Shi Yao brandished her dagger and moved toward Tu Yi, trying to kill him. Tu Yi, playing along, feigned innocence and smiled, telling her not to kill him. The other women in the harem were furious upon seeing this. They saw Shi Yao as a dangerous character, who was trying to steal the spotlight. The girl in bikini stepped forward and announced she would capture the assassin for the king. But Shi Yao quickly overpowered her and threw her aside, leaving the girl panicked. Shi Yao was surprised by the weak resistance and wondered if the girl was crazy to attack her, despite having no fighting skills. She wondered if this was what it meant to role play. The other women didn't want Shi Yao to outshine them either. They were determined to keep the king's attention and weren't going to let Shi Yao get away with it. One by one, the women in the harem surrounded the king, clearly angry. They came together with fierce determination to protect the king and capture the assassin. They made it clear that anyone trying to get to the king would have to get through them first. Shi Yao was surprised and frustrated that these women were so eager to defend someone she thought was worthless. She wondered why the women were eager to give away their lives just to protect an unjust ruler. However, she wasn't going to show any mercy to them, so she decided to kill them all. With her dagger ready, she prepared to fight anyone who came near. Tu Yi, initially scared, thought about using this chance to deal with the assassin. However, he was worried that Shi Yao might harm the women, who worked his resources to act like a debauched ruler. Just as Shi Yao was about to make her move, Tu Yi quickly shouted, telling her to stop and spare the women. Shi Yao thought it was ironic that the prince was trying to protect the women instead of using the opportunity to run away. She let go of the woman she was holding and asked if he was willing to die for them. One of the girls said that she didn't mind dying as long as she left a mark on Tu Yi's heart. Tu Yi realized that the chaotic situation might ruin his plan. He had hoped to become a prince without causing too much fuss. Now he needed to find a way to calm things down without getting himself killed. Shi Yao told him that she could spare the life of the girls if he agreed to give his own life. Tu Yi apologized and told her that it wasn't his time to die. He still had to finish his mission and make sure that the country failed. Shi Yao thought to herself that all of his words were empty, just like she had expected. However, to her surprise, Tu Yi walked over to her and told her that he was willing to give up the throne as a compromise. He revealed that he knew about her purpose for trying to assassinate him. Shi Yao was shocked that Tu Yi knew so much about her mission. She wondered if this was a trap. Shi Yao asked him what he was trying to do. Tu Yi smiled and said casually that his purpose was to be a lazy and incompetent ruler. He had no desire to be a leader and would rather give the throne to someone else. The harem women were stunned and confused by Tu Yi's confession. The system then alerted him that the kingdom's destruction event had been triggered. The original history had seen a general leading a rebellion, and the current conditions meant that if Tu Yi could advocate for the militia, it would result in a significant loss of power. Tu Yi was pleased with this outcome. Initially, he just wanted to keep the harem, but triggering the destruction event was even better. When Shi Yao heard Tu Yi's words about not wanting power and being willing to give up the throne, she couldn't believe it. She thought it must be a trick. She told him that she didn't care if he was being truthful or not. Her purpose was to make sure Tu Su ascended the throne. If she just killed him on the spot, it would fulfill her mission. Tu Yi knew that he needed to come up with something else. He told her that killing him would only make Tu Su look like a tyrant. Even if he became the emperor, his reputation would be tainted. He claimed that everything he was doing was for the sake of Tu Su. His words hit Shi Yao hard, making her hesitate. She went into a flashback about the previous emperor. After establishing the Daqian Dynasty and pacifying the northern chaos, he asked Shi Yao if he had been a good emperor. She told him that he would surely be talked about as a wise monarch for ages to come. But then the emperor said something that really shook Shi Yao. He mentioned that he knew his time was running out and that the Daqian Dynasty might actually benefit from having a new ruler. He just hoped for a successor who, even if not as skilled or ambitious, would be tolerant and not greedy. Shi Yao was taken aback. At first, she thought the emperor meant that Tu Su was the right successor, but now she was questioning everything. Tu Yi seemed to fit the emperor's description of being lazy and non-combative, which made Shi Yao doubt her plans. Shi Yao shouted and reminded herself that the crown prince Tu Su was the legitimate eldest son of the late emperor. There was no way the late emperor wanted to make Tu Yi the new prince. She turned to Tu Yi and told him that she wanted him to make a trip to the northern county to complete the abdication ceremony with Prince Tu Su in person. Tu Yi felt a bit relieved, thinking it was a good idea to see Tu Su and handle the abdication. Just then, a figure ran up to Tu Yi and shouted at him to wait. It was Ah Sha. She stepped up to Shi Yao and asked her if she had forgotten about the talisman in her hand before she dared to threaten the king. Ah Sha pulled out 2 talismans, ready to use them. Seeing Ah Sha, Shi Yao's thoughts about Tu Yi changed. Ah Sha was clearly a magician, which made Shi Yao realize she had been too quick to trust Tu Yi. Shi Yao was annoyed with herself and tightened her grip on her short dagger. She saw Tu Yi and Ah Sha as manipulative and deceitful, but Tu Yi looked confused, not understanding what was going on. Ah Zhu then came up and whispered to Tu Yi, telling him not to worry, as Ah Sha had everything under control. She told him that Ah Sha was strong, and he had nothing to worry about with her skills. Tu Yi was surprised, as he didn't need her protection or want the women interfering. Ah Zhu was glad that Ah Sha stepped in to protect Tu Yi. Earlier, Leah told Ah Sha and Ah Zhu that their mission was to kill Tu Yi and avenge their families. But he later clarified that their real task was to ensure Tu Yi's survival and to work on the destruction of the Daqian Dynasty. Leah initially planned to support Tu Yi's rise to the throne, intending to use him to change the dynasty. Ah Zhu quickly understood Li's plan and realized that he wanted them to create chaos and use Tu Yi to lead the country toward destruction. Li was pleased with Ah Zhu's insight and nodded, telling them that their job was to keep a close eye on Tu Yi and search for his weaknesses. Li's face darkened as he spoke, which scared Ah Zhu. It was the first time she'd seen Li look so intimidating. Ah Zhu was puzzled by his expression. She wondered if it was excitement or something else. Before she could figure it out, Li made a serious expression and told them that they must not let Tu Yi stand on the same side as Tu Su. After spending some time with Tu Yi, both Ah Sha and Ah Zhu realized that Li's assessment of Tu Yi was correct. His earlier acts of being a loser and stupid were just an act. Meanwhile, my man was literally scared of being saved. Thanks to Li's deep planning, Ah Sha quickly stepped up to protect Tu Yi from Shi Yao's attack. Shi Yao thought that Tu Yi was using the costume party to make contact with the Kun Guard. Ah Zhu, realizing that Shi Yao's plan had been guessed, felt sorry for her. Meanwhile, Tu Yi was trying to stop both of them from fighting. Chaos erupted among the harem. Tu Yi started laughing while seeing them fight. Ah Zhu noticed him looking away and tried sneaking up on him. However, as she got close, he turned around and looked at her with fierce eyes. She immediately fell down, pretending to not know what was going on. Tu Yi almost forgot that Ah Zhu and Ah Sha were working for Li. He knew their protection of him was part of their plan. Tu Yi thought Li wanted to use him as a puppet, so he needed to control Ah Sha's actions to complete his mission. Just then, Tu Yi received a notification from the system that a general holding a powerful army was outside. If Tu Yi successfully advocated for the general, the mission would be considered complete, and 1,000 points would be deducted from his national power. Excited, Tu Yi remembered about Ah Sha's weakness. When Ah Sha stepped away from Shi Yao's attack, Tu Yi moved in close and held her tightly. He knew that touching Ah Sha on a sensitive spot, like her chin, would cause her to collapse morally, making it easier to proceed with his plan. Tu Yi gently lifted Ah Sha's chin and told her that he couldn't let his beloved concubine risk her life while protecting him. Ah Sha started blushing and fell unconscious. Seeing his chance, Tu Yi changed his expression to a fierce one and shouted at Shi Yao to hurry up and finish her mission. Shi Yao was confused and couldn't understand what was going on. She wondered if this was another trick from the tyrant. Shi Yao, unsure but desperate, decided to act quickly. She grabbed Tu Yi and led him away with a knife at his neck. Tu Yi was satisfied, since this was what he had been waiting for. Without Tu Yi's support, Ah Sha collapsed to the floor, seemingly unconscious. Just then, a new announcement popped up. Ah Sha's second hidden attribute had been activated. When touched by a man, she would lose control and see every other woman except Ah Zhu as a mortal enemy. Xiao didn't expect such a fierce reaction. Sha seemed to transform into someone else. She glared at Xiao and asked her how dare she try to steal her man. She advanced with a much stronger presence, ready to confront Xiao. Despite being trained in martial arts, Xiao had no chance to fight back against Sha. She started throwing some weird gang signs. It was the summoning ritual for the third-level true fire spell. Sha looked fierce and intense as she directed the fire towards Xiao, who was caught off guard and didn't know how to defend against it. Zhu held her breath, hoping her sister would succeed. Tu Yi, watching Sha's powerful aura, was worried that his plans would be ruined if Xiao was killed. He shouted for Xiao to move, but Xiao didn't react in time. Tu Yi threw himself at Xiao, pushing her out of harm's way. Sha was caught off guard by this and accidentally sent the fire straight at Tu Yi. The fire was so destructive that it affected part of the royal palace. Tu Yi and Xiao were safe, but ended up in a weird position as their lips accidentally touched. Xiao was furious to be caught in this situation. She was shoved away by the impact of the fire, and the kiss with Tu Yi made her even more upset. The fire attack was powerful, but Tu Yi and Xiao weren't in the center of the explosion, so they were only mildly affected. Zhu, surprised, had to cover her mouth. In the smoke, Tu Yi appeared to be in good shape. A notification then announced that the host's actions had led to the failure of the previous nation destruction event, and a new event had been triggered. The event was considered successful if these conditions were met. An assassin attempted to assassinate the host in the main hall. A third-party person proficient in medicine should be present during the assassination. If a person takes action against the assassin and the host ends up defeating them, the event is considered complete, and the host receives 1,000 national power points. He is suffering from success. Tu Yi was furious. Despite his efforts, the system gave him more points instead of deducting them. He cursed and was engulfed in a terrifying aura, scaring Zhu, who struggled to stand. She realized just how intense Tu Yi's anger was and thought about Lord Li's warnings about him. Xiao, who had fainted, woke up later. Tu Yi was immediately by her side, asking if she was awake. Xiao, feeling sore, looked around and asked where she was. Tu Yi proudly announced that she was in his sleeping chamber. Xiao noticed that her hands were tied, which made her furious, and he called Tu Yi shameless. Tu Yi was confused by the sudden outburst. Xiao continued to shout, but Tu Yi interrupted, pointing out that if it weren't for him, she would have died. It turned out that after the assassination attempt, Li, who was in charge of the palace guards, had led his troops to capture the assassin and protect the prince. Since the assassin was just Xiao, the situation was quickly resolved. After that, Li knelt in front of Tu Yi, apologizing for his mistake, and saying that his negligence had put the king in danger. Tu Yi waved it off, saying it was no big deal and that there was no real danger. Li insisted he would capture the assassin and find out who was behind it. Tu Yi, not wanting Li to take Xiao away, quickly stopped him, saying he wanted to keep Xiao for himself. Frustrated, he boldly declared that he wanted to keep the assassin, and even implied he wanted to have a more personal relationship with her. Li didn't like that idea and said the assassin was too dangerous to keep around. Tu Yi insisted he could handle it and made it clear he wasn't worried about dealing with a disarmed woman. Li had no choice but to agree and handed Xiao over to Tu Yi. Tu Yi then took Xiao back to his room and told Zhu to stay and take care of Sha. He called Shu to follow him and ordered everyone else to leave. Despite the failed plan, Tu Yi was determined to make use of Xiao for his own goals. He knew that he had to send her back to Tu Su to continue working for the destruction of this country. Xiao, terrified, screamed as Tu Yi got close, saying she'd rather be killed than stay with him. The scene changed to Zhuo, pulling up with a Komodo dragon in the palace. Everyone started shouting that it was a divine animal called the Blue Dragon. Li thought to himself if the people in that age didn't know about the animal, since it was called the Komodo dragon in his world. Zhuo tried to gaslight Tu Yi and told him to look at the beautiful blue dragon. As Li was looking at the dragon, he received a system notification informing him about another nation-destroying event that had just been triggered. In history, the Prime Minister of Emperor Qin Shi had brought in a spotted deer inside the court. He called the deer a horse in front of the emperor, and all of the court chimed in. The emperor was also tricked into calling it a horse, and after that incident, his authority gradually fell into the Prime Minister's hands. If Zhuo managed to gaslight Li into calling the Komodo dragon a blue dragon, He would trigger the nation's destruction event and cost him 2,000 points. Realizing what was going on, Tu Yi let out a creepy smile and prepared to put on his best act. He asked Zhuo why the creature in front of him didn't look like a blue dragon. Zhuo thought that Tu Yi had fallen into his trap. He called out to the other courtiers and asked them if the creature was actually a blue dragon. They all agreed and started telling him fake stories about the blue dragon. Zhuo was openly challenging the emperor and wondered what Tu Yi was thinking. Meanwhile, Tu Yi couldn't help but be excited about all of this. Since the event was about to be completed, suddenly someone from the harem shouted that the creature looked too ugly, so it couldn't be the blue dragon. Tu Yi was terrified seeing his plan go wrong. He quickly got to thinking and asked Ah Sha what she thought about the dragon.